You are listening to the Vichaar Manthan Podcast.
Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Vichaar Manthan Podcast. I am your host Sumit Sharma, and it gives me great honor and great privilege to be hosting this project, a dharmic project, a project of Vichaar Manthan looking to explore modern day challenges, modern day notions. Let's explore reality through a dharmic lens, through a civilizational lens of dharmic aptitude. So we are conducting in-depth interviews with some of the best thinkers of our time. We're trying to explore Dharma, we're trying to explore lives and see if we can recapture some of the ancient and classical ideals of sustainability, of liberty and flourishing. So encouraging everyone to tune in for an earnest conversation. We have discussed topics such as womanhood, liberty, freedom, wealth, relationships, green future, philosophy, academia, and so much more. I'm very excited today to bring Fred Stella onto the platform. Fred grew up in Detroit. He studied comms and media. The earliest part of his life, he was a Roman Catholic, and we're going to talk to Fred about that in more detail. He's the president of an interfaith dialogue. He also has a radio show / podcast called Common Threads. He is a pracharak of the West Michigan Hindu Temple, and he also sits on the leadership council of the Hindu American Foundation. So I think we have a lot to learn from Fred, his life, his journey, his views on life, and also the diaspora, or at least being Hindu out in America. So Fredji, namaste and welcome to the Vichaar Manthan Podcast.
Namaste. It's just a pleasure and honor to be with you today.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for joining us. So let's start at the beginning. What was a young Fred like, and what did the early life sort of begin, and how did that go?
You know, I was a fairly dull child, dull in the sense that I didn't have much intellectual capacity.
Sure.
There are those that say that attribute has never left me, but I was perhaps even duller. At the same time, even though I wasn't very bright, in kindergarten, a teacher told my mother, I don't know if Freddie will ever even be able to write his name. Okay, that's pretty dull.
Yeah.
A year later, I was writing my name fairly legibly, and I went on through school, college, the whole shot. But what I remember distinctly is that I would sometimes sequester myself from my family. Just go into some room, sit down, and I would meditate. Now, I didn't know I was meditating, and I was actually using a particular form of what I would find out to be later on a Hindu meditation.
Interesting. Okay.
If you were to walk in on me and say, Freddie, what are you doing? I would have no answer for you whatsoever. It's something that happened spontaneously. And then, as I grew older, that went away. I just didn't do that anymore.
Okay.
But the fact that I remember it from such a young age means something.
Yeah. That's probably quite a rare occurrence. I can't imagine many teachers being unequivocal in their approach, perhaps.
Certainly in 1970, you are correct.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just was motivated, and I thought, okay, I need to learn more about this. At that time, again, 1970 Detroit, there were very, very few expressions of Hindu Dharma.
Sure.
Okay, really. And the only one that made itself public was ISKCON.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So the only option I had if I wanted to go to a mandir, would be to go to the ISKCON mandir, because by that time they were very, very public. They had public chanting in the main street of downtown Detroit every Saturday.
But back in the 70s, right? This is.
Oh yeah,
Okay. Wow.
yeah. They were.
They know they get publicity. I think they understand how to do that very well.
Yeah, yeah. So I knew that they existed. I approached one of them when I was downtown next. They gave me a card that talked about their Sunday kirtan and Gita discourse, and then the dinner afterwards. And I found a friend of mine who could drive, and we went. And again, I just, part of me said, this is home. Now, ISKCON in particular was not my home. I am with a completely different sampradaya.
Sure.
But at that time, the answers that I got from them, I certainly appreciated much more and just felt that they were true. The relationship with divinity that we have was certainly less threatening.
And what did other people think of ISKCON or even Hinduism in general at that time? What was the sort of...
Well, because of ISKCON's really, if I may use this term, their in-your-face mission work.
Okay.
To be on the streets in all the major cities, to be in airports, they were considered eccentric.
Okay.
And at that time, pretty much every man that you met, regardless of whether you were going to the temple or whether you just saw them in the supermarket, they're going to be wearing a dhoti. All right. And they're going to have the shaved head with a tonsure. Nowadays, of course, members of ISKCON could look like everybody else.
Yeah, you don't have to be so... Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, they were considered eccentric. And as far as Hinduism in general, I would say that most people just had no idea what it was. They knew it was foreign. They knew it was Indian. They had, I'm sure, a prejudgment that it was purely polytheistic. Okay.
And the stuff you were learning, your inquiry, where you begin to resonate with thoughts and ideas, were you able to then answer some of these questions, at least for yourself? Did you?
I was getting, yes, I was certainly getting close. Again, the answers that I was getting on the big questions of life appealed to me more.
Sure.
And it's not, if you were to ask me the meaning of life and I was going to tell you the meaning of life is pizza, you go, yes, that's great, because I love pizza. That might be an answer you just want to believe, and so you believe it.
Okay.
But then there are answers that you get, and it's not that you want to believe them, it's just that you do believe them, that there's just something about it that makes sense.
Yeah.
The idea of a judgmental deity that will allow people to burn for all eternity in a fiery pit, the
hell.
God of, huh?
The hell.
Yeah, exactly. And why would you go to hell? Well, certainly you can go to hell for murdering somebody, or raping somebody and all of that, but you would also go to hell for being a part of the wrong religion.
Oh dear. And you did not like the sound of that?
I did not like that at all. No. So the idea in Hindu Dharma that God doesn't care what religion you're in. He cares about the kind of person you are and what you're attempting to do with your life and all of those other things. It made sense to me. It was very comforting, and it seemed true, because I'd already inwardly denounced the other. So
in the sort of formative years of your life, I guess you've gone from Christ to Krishna. Was that the transition?
here's the thing. I never stopped loving Jesus, because when I would read Jesus, for the most part, he appealed to me. His life appealed to me. And so even today, I have no problem. I still refer to the Gospels a great deal. So it wasn't like I traded Jesus for Krishna. And of course, when you're with ISKCON, all you're going to hear about in the pantheon is Krishna.
Of course.
And then, of course, after my experience with ISKCON, I broadened myself to learn a much more, not only about the pantheon, but also the great thinkers, in particular Patanjali and Swami Shankar. Those are the two historical figures with which I identify the most.
Right. So to take us through the sort of the next couple of years of your life, maybe to I know you've mentioned on various podcasts before that maybe it was in your early 30s then when you sort of really became defined, say, in your identity. What did it take for that to happen? What did the quest ensue? What types of conclusions did you come to?
You know, it's interesting because it took me a long time to acknowledge that I was a Hindu.
Okay.
And part of it was the lack of community.
Okay. Yeah, you said Detroit, right? There was...
Well, at that time, I moved to Grand Rapids. So for people who are not aware, Grand Rapids, it's the second largest city in Michigan. It's a couple of hours away from Detroit.
Right.
And I moved there when I was 25. I moved here. I'm still in Grand Rapids. And I had no community. I could no longer easily go to the ISKCON temple, which I did still from time to time when I was in Detroit. And I was just kind of on my own. But I did hook up with a meditation group. But the greater Hindu community, it took me a while to connect with. So I remember a couple of things, because I would identify as that we weren't using the term back then, but this spiritual but not religious.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that.
Yeah, okay. So again, I didn't use that term, but that's kind of what I was.
Right.
I called myself a Zen Catholic for a while, not knowing where else to put myself. And then the Hindu community started to grow, and I started connecting with it. I started going to local Hindu functions. People would have pujas at their homes, and I started going to those. So I had community, and I remember distinctly, I started subscribing to Hinduism Today magazine. And I had a question. I ended up calling someone, and I cannot remember why, but it was somebody connected with the magazine, and this is back in the 80s. And I said something, and the person said something about being Hindu, and I said, well, I don't really identify as Hindu. And he paused, and he just went, oh. And that affected me, because if you sat the two of us down and you asked us our beliefs and you asked us our practices, they would be really, really close.
Yeah.
So why is he a Hindu and I'm not a Hindu?
That's interesting to hear. And I think in the world today, identity is a big problem. It's a big thing that people struggle with. I think people play politics with identity as well, where you associate with things, you identify as things. Was that the challenge back then also? Was it important to have an identity, or a religious identity, or even give it a name? Was that a...
I would say for most people, their religious identity was people who were religious. And even people who were nominally religious. For instance, people who were Christian but only went to church on Christmas and Easter, it was still important for them to, for the most part, to identify as Christian. They liked that. And then some people would really identify strongly with their denomination. I'm Lutheran, I'm Presbyterian, even though they, again, twice a year they'd go to church.
Sure.
Ask them, they could be Lutheran, and you ask them, well, what's the difference between a Lutheran and a Presbyterian? They'd have no idea. Okay, no, they could not defend their faith. That's a classic Christian term, defend the faith. So I would have liked to, I think, earlier, and I didn't know what the qualifications were. And here's the thing with Hinduism and Buddhism to some degree that's different from the other major religions. If you run into somebody and you say, hey, why don't you have lunch with me next week? And he says, oh, I can't, it's Ramadan. The person is Muslim.
Okay, sure.
If you were to say, oh, I didn't know you were Muslim, he's not going to say, well, I'm not really Muslim, but I'm spiritual but not religious. But yeah, I do practice. I do fast on Ramadan. I pray 5 times a day, and I'm taking Hajj to Mecca next year. They're Muslims.
Yeah,
they got no problem saying that. Yeah. Okay, Christians the same way for the most part. If you say, hey, are you going to want to go to lunch with me next Friday? And the guy says, well, no, it's Good Friday. We fast on Good Friday. He's a Catholic.
Yeah.
Case closed. You run into somebody and say, hey, you want to go to lunch with me next week? He says, well, I can't. I'm going on a meditation retreat led by a Swami, and we're going to learn advanced pranayama techniques and have a Shiva Abhishekam. And oh, sorry, Hindu. Well, no, not really. I don't like to have labels.
Is that a problem?
It's not to say a problem. I would never coerce someone to identify with any label that they don't want to. They don't feel like it. It's just interesting that in Hinduism and again in Buddhism, to this, you can take up a Buddhist meditation practice. You can have a picture of the Dalai Lama on your altar, but you can also say that no, I'm still Catholic or I'm Presbyterian. I just adopted a Buddhist meditation practice. It's basically, it is the generosity of the Dharmic religions to say, here, take. We don't require you to be a member to enjoy the fruits of this phenomenal civilization.
I think that's the plurality of this quote unquote religion, right? The way of life has so many facets that approach and resonate with different individuals. And I've said this before, you go somewhere to India, to Bharat, and stand and travel 100 miles in any direction, let's say, you'll find a different type of people that eat different food, maybe wear their clothes slightly differently, celebrate their religion in different ways, talk another language, yet there is this binding fabric across India, this Hinduness, this dharmic aptitude that exists across, and even outside of India, actually, the diaspora, like we have here in the UK, and I'm sure in the US. I've spoken to many people, especially at the Hindu American Foundation, also that share this quality, this uniqueness. So, Fred, you tell me a bit about the West Michigan Hindu Temple and the time you spent there, and now you are a pracharak, and what that means.
Sure. So we have only been a temple for about 14 years. And when we formed, because of course, before that, for the most part, we were just meeting in people's homes, by and large. And when we formed, we realized something about almost all ethnic congregations of any faith, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, and that is that they tend to be insular. They
So
tend
like
to
a ethnic
yes.
church?
Yeah, sure. There are plenty of ethnic churches. You have Vietnamese Catholic churches, Korean
Okay.
Protestant churches. Yes, absolutely. There's plenty of immigrant churches that are Christian,
And you're saying they're all very
they're very insular.
to
And the same
themselves.
thing with the Buddhist community. We have a Vietnamese Buddhist temple here, and again, the only word I can describe is insular or sequestered. They just keep to themselves, if you will.
Why do you think that is? What is it about? And
Well,
you're
I
saying this
think
is sort of in America, maybe? I mean,
I'm sure it has to do with the fact that this is their comfort zone. That this is where they can be free to speak their native language, to hold their services in their native language. During the week, they're probably working with a variety of people, and they take great comfort in knowing that on such and such a day they are going to be with their people.
people
So
of their
whether
kind,
they're
people of their sort of kind, of their ilk.
and they're not jumping through hoops. You can jump over a hoop too,
Yeah,
I
you
guess.
can.
But you know what I'm saying. To let people in, to let people into their house of worship, to just observe, maybe even to be a part of it. They just don't. So the board of directors of the West Michigan Hindu Temple wisely realized that they did not want to be that they wanted people outside of the Hindu community, outside of the Indian community, to be a part of our not to join the temple necessarily, by all means, that
But
not
open
that.
doors, you come in if you like and inquire and
Exactly.
explore.
Yes. And so we developed the role, what we call pracharak. Now, I'm sure many people watching this know what a pracharak is when you talk about RSS or HSS. The way we use pracharak, we define it as outreach minister.
Okay.
So the goal of the pracharak is to bring the community into the temple and the temple into the community. Right. So another thing too is with a lot of immigrant faith expressions, that they don't appear in the greater community. So right. So for instance, if there is an event, let's say an interfaith event, the Christian is probably going to be a white man or woman who's a minister.
Sure. Yeah.
Not somebody who's a Vietnamese Catholic. Right. So we wanted to have a presence in the greater community. So not only did we want to have people from the greater community come into the temple, we wanted exposure in the greater community. Because, for instance, for people who don't know anything about Hinduism, this is a great way to break down barriers, to smash stereotypes, and essentially defeat ignorance.
So
that's what we want.
Sounds like it's a great idea. It's a great role to have, someone to actually carry out proactive outreach. And I think discussing this before, a typical Panditji or a Maharaj, for example, is more in the community rather than doing proactive outreach.
He's in the temple community, right? The typical pujari, Pandit, is in the temple, and that's where pretty much all of their work is, unless they have to go to somebody's home to do a private puja or something.
But they're still doing sort of like temple activities.
It's still temple activity, exactly. And of course, a lot of pujaris, wonderful as they are, they don't always have the language ability that is needed for outreach work.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So why is that important?
Well, if you're going to give a talk on Hinduism at a university,
You
you
gotta
should be
you
able
gotta know how to
to,
connect to that audience and talk.
well, you need to speak English really well.
Sure.
Okay. And if English is like not your second language, but perhaps your third or fourth
Mm,
language,
mm,
right? Then, and certainly I have met pundits around the country meaning the United States, who speak English very, very well.
yeah.
But I've also met a lot of pundits who don't. They speak 3 or 4 or 5 Indian languages and they can get by with English, but to deliver
Sure.
a lecture, to actually be an ambassador for
That
their community.
there's probably a greater responsibility there. And you mentioned sort of on the topic of interfaith. If you are representing the Hindu faith and you need to go speak at, say, a church or indeed an interfaith event or dialogue, then there's a certain frame or frame of reference to
Yes,
be effective in your communication about Hinduism or
absolutely.
Hindutva.
Absolutely, sure. And so what we did, and I believe this is unique, because there are a number of people in temples across the United States, Canada, and England. I'm sure that if a school called a temple and said, we would like to have somebody come speak at our history class or anthropology class, you could probably find someone and they do a wonderful job. But the board felt that it was important that the person who holds the position of pracharak also be legally ordained
Okay.
as a clergy member.
That's very interesting. So give a sort of official
Yes,
rubber stamp, almost recognized by law.
yes, recognized by law.
Wow.
Yes. So when I am at an interfaith clergy event,
Hmm.
I'm clergy. So I can sit at the same table with the imam, the
Okay.
Catholic
So
priest, the Jewish rabbi, etc., etc.
there's a weighting behind it, not just in the Hindu circles per se, but actually with the rest of society, how they hold up a figurehead in society. Like you're saying, you can sit at the same table. Okay.
Yes, yes,
That's
exactly. And that has been one of the most, I mean, in the top 3 rewarding experiences in my
interesting.
life.
Could you share with us a particular moment where that has bared fruitful to have, either for yourself or for the temple?
There have been a few. Let me think of one or two. I would say this. I am also legally credentialed to perform weddings.
Okay.
All right. Now, I do not do Vedic weddings. If 2 Hindus want to get married in Grand Rapids, they don't come to me. They go to the pundits.
Okay.
Having said that, I have sort of co-officiated, if that's the correct term, where the pundit and I worked together in the ceremony, and it was my job to interpret for the greater community. Because, of course, when 2 Hindus get married, the congregation is going to be a lot more than Hindu.
Okay.
All of their office friends and family who've never been to a Hindu wedding before are going to be there. And, it's a couple hours long. And just to hear somebody speaking Sanskrit,
That's not going to mean much to
no,
them,
it
right?
isn't. Right.
And so, okay, so you're providing sort of extra support and guidance and
Yes.
translation and making it a bit more real and applicable for them.
That is the goal. Yes. So I have done that on several occasions.
Okay.
But the people who I marry are not Hindu. Although I have done a couple of weddings where one person was Hindu,
Okay.
one person wasn't, and they did not want a temple ceremony.
Sure.
The weddings that I do are usually between people who have an affinity for the Dharma. They may meditate, they may do hatha yoga, they may share many of our beliefs, but they're not Hindu. Maybe they nominally belong to some other religion. All of the stories are different.
Sure.
The fact
but
is,
they're doing Hindu things, or they have a
many of them do. Many of them
Hinduness
do.
to them.
Or they have a Hindu way of life. It's not like I make them fill out a form and
Yeah, sure.
Okay. But people come to me, and here's the thing: many of them, they grew up Christian. I would say the vast majority of people for whom I have officiated their weddings, they grew up Christian. They still have a sense of spirituality, but they feel that they would be hypocrites to go back to the church of their childhood and say, hey, I haven't been here in 20 years, but it's really beautiful in here, so I want to get married.
Right. Just for the aesthetics, really. They want deeper meaning.
Exactly. So they do not want a wedding. They come to me because they don't want to go to a judge, some government official who could legally marry them.
Just do paperwork. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. They want spirituality. So the temple board and I came to this understanding that they would ordain me to legally marry couples outside of the temple. Occasionally, somebody will ask for a brief ceremony. That is to say, a ritual, a particular Hindu ritual, part of the Vedic ceremony. For instance, the rotation around the fire 7 times,
or the 7 steps, or something.
Yes, exactly, right. But for the most part, it is there's not a lot of ritual in it. And if you were to attend, I'm sure everyone who's watching this, I'm going to guess, has been to a Protestant wedding.
Yeah, I've been to a few church weddings myself.
Of course.
Yeah.
The wedding that I would perform, the choreography looks Protestant. The father
in a church as well, or sort of just
no, not in a church, but we're in a hall, say,
right.
in a catering hall.
Yeah.
Right. You have the bride walking with the father, meeting the groom.
Okay. So it outwardly kind of looks.
It outwardly looks very Western. Yes, because this is what is familiar to their family. You don't want to ask them to sit cross-legged around a big
on the floor, yeah.
Okay. And have tilak and all of that. So anyway, the choreography looks Protestant, but what I do, the message that I share in the wedding is all dharmic.
Okay.
One of the
at its essence, at its core, the sort of the
yes,
principles and
exactly
the sermon that you're talking about is
one of my constants is sharing the Puruchotras, the 4 goals, and how that is so important to a wedding. I mean, to a marriage where you both are aiming for kama, artha, and dharma and moksha. And I explain each and every one of them. And one of the reasons we do this, first of all, we consider it a community service.
Yeah.
That we are helping people who may not have another place to go if they want something spiritual, if they want something somewhat dharmic. And second of all, this gives us the opportunity to present Hinduism to a group of people who never have been into a temple.
They otherwise would have no contact with that.
Exactly. They've never met a Hindu in their lives. And so this gives us an opportunity just to share a morsel of it to people.
Do you think the plural nature of Hinduism allows for that? I'm sure
you can go, hey, you know what? I could rob a bank today because I think I'm one of the chosen. I'm one of the elect. It's not that.
Okay.
What this theology says is, if you are chosen, if God has it in his plan for you to go to heaven, there are certain signs, there are certain attributes that you will naturally have. And these tell you. So for instance, if you want to love God, that's a good sign. All right. If you try, if love of God happens upon you, that's a good sign. Now, huh?
What does that say about free will? Am I?
Oh,
do I
no,
start
they're
to
not. They're
lose?
not. No, they don't go into that.
Okay.
I mean, they don't. They're not into free will.
Okay. Then just not into it.
No. No. So as I say, there are signs. Traditionally, wealth is also a sign. If God is blessing you with material wealth,
then it can't be of your own merit. It's because God allowed you to have it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. You've not heard of the Protestant work ethic?
I have not. Please tell me.
That's a real American thing.
Okay.
You will want to work. You will want to work hard, and that is a gift of God. Now, I'm getting to doubt. Okay. If you doubt, that might be a negative sign. That might tell you that you're not chosen for heaven. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's very polar.
Yeah. So
okay.
if they would say someone who is part of the elect, that is the term they use, elect.
Sure.
If you are part of the elect, you will not doubt. And then if you do doubt, well, I don't know if you're part of the elect. So there's a fear of doubt in that particular. Now, having said all of this, let me say, because I live in a very reformed, heavy community, Grand Rapids.
That's quite hard to reconcile, really. There seems like a lot of, I don't know if restrictions is the right word, but a very structured sort of format that doesn't allow for being agile in your approach. Perhaps you're either one or the other. Have I read that right? Is that maybe I just don't have the experience?
It's complicated.
Okay, fine.
I'm sure you don't want to spend that much time on it, but I do live in a heavily reformed community, as I say, and I can also tell you that the new generation of reformed ministers and laity, that the actual churchgoers, many of them are rethinking or trying to put a new spin on what I've been telling you. What I've been telling you is classical reformed thinking.
Interesting.
Okay. And I'm sure that I could invite some of my colleagues who are reformed Christians, and they would say, oh yeah, okay, that was so 300 years ago. Let me tell you where we're going now. But there still are plenty of people in my community that would say that they had no their free will did not get them to God.
Interesting.
Yes. Another thing too, and there are 5 points of Calvinism, and the first point is total depravity, meaning that at our core we are totally depraved. As you can imagine, some people have a hard time.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, but let's not dwell too much on that.
Yeah.
Fredji, we're going to go into what I call the rapid fire round.
Okay.
So we'll have some quick fire questions that perhaps let our audience understand you a little bit better. So let's get into it.
All right.
If you were stranded on a deserted island, what 3 items would you take with you and why?
3 items?
Yes.
I would take my mala. I would take my freezer chest.
Okay.
And a motorboat.
Sounds good. What goes into your perfect breakfast smoothie?
What is a breakfast movie?
Smoothie.
Smoothie.
I've had that before, actually. That's interesting.
Okay. My perfect breakfast smoothie would be oat milk based, a little bit of honey, and as much as I do like vegetable smoothies, in the morning, it's got to be all fruit. So I'm talking about apples, bananas, strawberries, and blueberries.
Awesome. Very similar to something I have. Very nice.
Yes.
So next smoothie at yours, Fred. We'll have to join for breakfast. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
You know, this is going to be very boring. Probably you hear this a lot, but just because I dream about it so much, I'd love to fly.
Okay, nice. Do you reckon it would take energy? Like, would you get tired of flying? Like you get tired of running?
I wouldn't want that. No, I would have to fly like Superman.
Yeah, you want the unlimited flying.
Yeah,
power.
I don't want to flap my arms or breathe heavily or anything like. No, I just want to like gliding through a swimming pool. You don't, when you're not moving your arms and legs, you're just gliding. That's what I want.
Heavily.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite book?
Yes. My favorite book is Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda.
I have it right here.
Oh, yay. One thing I did not mention in this, if I could very quickly, is that aside from my work at the Hindu temple, I am also in a leadership position of the local chapter of Yogananda's organization, Self-Realization Fellowship. And that means a lot to me as well.
Very nice. We can explore that a little later on.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite quote?
Yes. I hope that I would be willing to die for my religion, but a good argument could talk me out of it.
Okay.
Because I've been thinking about this. I need to be more physically, environmentally organized.
Okay.
And I challenged myself for a short period of time a few years ago. And I said, if I can just do this for like a month, just a little over a month. And I did that. And I was really pleased at the results. But then I said, well, the month is over. And then I lost it. And then recently I said, no, I really do want to be more organized. If you were to see my desk, I will say this, it doesn't look like it's dharmically inspired.
Interesting. Let's try to bring Dharma into all aspects of our life. So good luck to you on that. I'm forever trying to make my desk a great place to work and live and breathe. Thank you for that. Last but not least, and you kind of touched on Dharma earlier, but what does the term sustainability mean to you?
Well, the way that it is used today is almost exclusively in an ecological sense. And I'm strongly committed to all of those forces in our lives, nonprofit, governmental, industrial, that seek to sustain us as a planet. So that's what first comes to me. Now, certainly sustainability, I mean, I also have to sustain my body. I have to sustain my marriage. I have to sustain my my professional life. But when I hear sustainability used in conversation today, my mind immediately goes to the environment, and I am very passionate about it. About what I support philanthropically, and to a certain degree, a significant degree, I think, how I spend my money.
Interesting. Very nice. Thank you, Fred, for that on the rapid fire rounds. We'll end that there and get back into the main conversation. And just to call out to everyone listening at home, this is the Vichaar Manthan Podcast. Today we are speaking to Fred Stella, who's over in America, telling us about his journey from being Roman Catholic, now being Hindu in his nature, and the various avenues of his life in which that manifests. You can catch this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on Audible now as well, and also YouTube to catch the video content of this. So please do tune in, like and share, and share it with anyone that could do with listening to this conversation. Vichaar Manthan as well is holding panel discussions, book clubs, and writing papers up and down the country here in the UK. And I know we have listeners all across the world tuning in. So thank you once again to everyone there. So back to the episode now with Fred Stella. Fred G, thank you for joining us so far. I wanted to pick up on a role that you have. You are the president of the Interfaith Dialogue, and you also have a radio show, a podcast called Common Threads, that deal with religions around the world and spirituality. And yeah, you've met amazing people on the way. I definitely feel that on hosting the Vichaar Manthan podcast, I'm getting to speak to experts around the world and poke and prod them. And I think they're humble enough and kind enough to let me do that in the face of Dharma. So even with yourself, Reggie, thank you, for letting me poke a look into your life and what makes up. But just on the interfaith thing,
yes.
And we spoke about this earlier. There's probably a lot of Hindus, a lot of not even just Hindus, but Dharmic based faith people that would snub the idea of interfaith dialogue. They feel maybe it's a waste of time, or perhaps other religions and faiths of the world don't have time for Hinduism or non-believers, kafirs, that kind of thing. There's certainly a disdain towards the other. What do you say to that?
I would say that interfaith engagement has been extremely rewarding for me. That doesn't mean that I haven't had to nudge for a seat at the table.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And what you have to do, number one, is you have to go in with the right expectations, or no expectations is even better, which is also very dharmic. You go in and you realize that if you are dialoguing with clergy, it's a whole lot different from dialoguing with the rank and file, the members of the churches and the synagogues and the mosques, because the clergy, they have a company line, so to speak. They're out to represent their faith, and they can only go so far in terms of acceptance. But the rank and file are free to think and say what they want.
Sure.
And so what I have found is that, I've given so many lectures at churches where someone will come up to me and say, I actually think I'm a Hindu. After listening to you, he goes, like, this is what I believe. But they, they maintain their membership in the church because that's what they've been doing for 70 years, and they're not going to stop now. But philosophically, I just see so many. You can tell when you're talking to somebody and they're having an aha moment. Something that they've never thought about before in their lives. And then you put the idea in their head and you see it's kind of working. I've had that happen several times. Another thing is you can't take your ball and go home after one snub, two snubs, three snubs. You just have to keep at it. And I'm very pleased to say that we have now a solid seat at the interfaith table, a solid seat. Now, there are some events where, say, for instance, the Abrahamics, there are some events where we aren't wanted, and that's okay, because if the interfaith event is the comparison of the Bible and the Quran, we don't need to be there. I mean, at least not on the podium.
Sure.
We might want to attend as a civilian. But the Abrahamics have a lot of stuff to work out themselves.
Yeah, I think we all have our challenges, and definitely that divide or the difference between the Dharmic-based faiths and the Abrahamic faiths is quite wide. Because you hear a lot of things like all religions are the same, all religions seek peace,
Oh
there
my
is only
God.
one God. And I you know what? I tell you, there's probably a lot of people that haven't thought too much about that, and only through my own self-discovery and speaking to like-minded people and people of different faiths do you actually say, well, no, religions aren't all the same. They don't all say the same thing. They don't all preach or teach the same guidance or steps. They are very different in their nature and their approach, and some are very prescriptive and regimented and have rules, and some are more open and have guidance, for example. And I don't think it's until someone does their own self-inquiry or do some research do they discover their own faith or their own culture at the next level of detail. And so I guess part of that is going through a manthan, doing a Vichaar Manthan on said topics.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to interfaith. Fred, you tell us about your leadership position with the Hindu American Foundation. What draws you to them, and sort of what do you have to do in that role?
Well, you remember what I told you about embarking on any new fruitful activity, what it takes?
A lot, apparently, yeah.
A swift kick. Well, I got one. I have a very dear friend and colleague that just made it what seemed to be at the time her life's work to get me involved in Hindu American Foundation. Not that I was opposed to it, mind you.
Sure.
But it was as if I don't even recall if she ever asked me if I wanted to be.
But she just made it happen. The divine boot.
The divine boot strikes again. Yes, it does. And I remember the very first thing that I attended. So Hindu American Foundation is an advocacy org. And one of the things we do many things, but one of the things we do, and one of my favorite things to do, is to descend upon Washington, D.C. as a group and meet with senators and representatives in our government to encourage them to vote for legislation that benefits not only Hindu Americans, but certainly Hindu Americans. We would be in that group of people. So, for instance, a lot of Hindu Americans are immigrants, as they're Nepali or Indian or Caribbean Americans, or not necessarily citizens yet. So we do a lot of work with immigration reform. We do. We've supported legislation, say, opposing hate crimes.
Sure.
Things like that.
I've seen a few things. I think Hindus in America face a lot of challenges. There's been caste issues and things trying to get into court and what have you. We've spoken to Sahagji Shukla. She's been on the Vichaar Manthan podcast before. So there are lots of challenges that HAF are tackling and
yes, indeed. But what I'm talking about specifically are those challenges that could be improved legislatively.
Sure.
Right. And so that trip to Washington, where and I was not a member of the council or anything like that. I was just a supporter. But going into the offices of senators and representatives and speaking to them and their senior aides and preparing, being well schooled in whatever legislation was up for a vote. Sure. And being able to try to persuade them. I mean, it was more exciting than voting, and I love to vote, but because it allowed me to actually feel like I was part of the political process, that I could affect change. That was my introduction to Hindu American Foundation. Excellent. And then shortly after that, within, I don't know, year or two, they invited me to be on the National Leadership Council, and I by that time was completely sold that this is where I need to be.
Excellent. So we'll drop a link below to anyone that's not visited the Hindu American Foundation and where they can maybe contact you as well. So Fred G, it's been great to talk to you. I've certainly learned a lot about your life and your thoughts on the way sort of life is put together and the journey that you've been on. Is there a specific call to action or a parting thought or a pearl of wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners of the VM podcast?
Since we are talking about Hindu American Foundation, I would say this to those who follow you in the United States. One of the reasons that we are challenged here in this country, and I know that you share some of what we deal with, but there is a great deal of Hindu phobia. Right, on campuses, sometimes in business, in society in general, vandalism at temples, etc. And there are different remedies for different problems. But one issue we have is that when it comes to affecting political change and social change, the other major world religions have been supporting their advocacy organizations for decades. And their advocacy organizations are incredibly wealthy. Now, I'm not talking about the people who work for them. I'm talking about the organization.
The institutions themselves.
They have the ability to affect change. They have the ability to affect how people think of them. The Hindu American community has been very lax. Very lax.
I think it's the same. It's the same here in the UK. There are
really,
for sure. The Hindu population, I think, needs to invest in that change, owning narratives, and I think, like you've said, the political and the influential advantages other faith groups and religions have is, like you said, decades, right, of work. So there's a lot of work for us to do as individuals to rally around institutions, and I think you're saying Hindu American Foundation is one of those answers. And I know there are notable causes here in the UK and across the world trying to do similar things.
Yes. So I was going to say, I don't know what the equivalent of the Hindu American Foundation or equivalents, I'm sure there are more than one, in the UK. So to my American friends, I implore you to, when you are thinking about where you're going to spend your dollars for the improvement of the world, of the country, think about Hindu American Foundation as one of those options. And if you are in a country where we don't operate, which means every other country besides the United States, to find an advocacy organization that supports the Dharma. And if there isn't one in your country, think about starting one.
Set one up. So we're trying to do a lot of that here at Vichaar Manthan. So we'd have a well wishes program. But thank you, Fred G, for sharing those insights with us. And to everyone listening at home, we'll be posting these links. So do click on the links, figure out where advocacy lies, where you sit with that, where you can contribute in time, money, energy, and effort. So, Fred G, thank you once again for joining us on the Vichaar Manthan podcast. It's been a privilege to host you and to hear more about you. And to everyone listening at home, thank you for tuning in. This has been another fantastic conversation where we are looking at modern day concepts and bringing an earnest conversation. And I think with Fred G in particular here, an earnest seeker of truth who seems to have found some of his own light and now is advocating and sharing that with the world through his role as a pracharak with West Michigan Hindu Temple, through various interfaith dialogues and serving on the HAS board. So Fred G, thank you once again for joining us.
Sumit Ji, it's been a pleasure. Namaste.
Thank you. And to everyone listening at home, my name is Sumit Sharma. I am the host for you here today on Vichaar Manthan Podcast. Looking forward to sharing more dharmic concepts and bringing this conversation about in an earnest manner. Thank you and namaste.